The snow had been falling for 3 hours by the time Ivy Marlowe realized she was going to be late. Not fashionably late, not apologetically late, the kind of late that gets a person fired. She pressed her back against the revolving door of the Harrington Grand, one hand gripping the strap of her nursing bag, the other fumbling with the latch of her cello case. The case was old, her mother's actually, and the wheels had been sticking since October. In a Montreal winter, that wasn't a minor inconvenience. That was a liability. The slush had soaked through her left boot 20 minutes ago on Sherbrooke Street, and now her sock made that specific wet sound with every step that she had decided, somewhere around the corner of Peel, to simply stop acknowledging. The Harrington Grand was not where Ivy worked. She worked at the Royal Victoria, 4 blocks east, where the ceilings were lower, and the coffee machine on the 3rd floor had been broken since September, and nobody seemed bothered enough to replace it. Tonight she was here because her quartet had a standing reservation in the lobby bar. Every second Thursday, 6 to 9, background music for people who weren't really listening. She needed the money. She always needed the money, in the quiet, dignified way that people from Trois-Rivières, who had moved to Montreal for nursing school and stayed for reasons they couldn't quite articulate, always seemed to need money. She got the door open on the 3rd try. The warmth hit her first, then the marble, then the smell, that particular combination of money and fresh flowers that places like the Harrington manufactured as carefully as anything else on their menu. Ivy blinked against the light, yanked the cello case through the door, and walked directly into something that did not move. She bounced back. The case went sideways. Her bag swung hard into her hip. The thing she had walked into was a man. He was tall enough that she had collided with his chest and not his shoulder, which said something. He was in a dark suit, charcoal, maybe navy. It was hard to tell in the lobby light, and he did not stumble, did not grab a nearby surface for balance, simply absorbed the impact of her and stood there unchanged, looking down at her with an expression that was not anger exactly, but was not the polite concern of a normal person either. Around him, the lobby had gone quiet. That was the thing Ivy noticed second. The first was that his eyes were the color of gunmetal and completely still. The second was that the 4 or 5 men in identical dark coats, who had been flanking him, had all in a single coordinated motion turned to look at her. "I'm so sorry," Ivy said. The wheel sticks on this thing. I should have been. I'm sorry." He didn't say anything for a moment. Just looked at her. Not the way men sometimes looked at her, cataloguing. More like he was reading something, or recalibrating something, working out a calculation she wasn't privy to. One of the men behind him moved forward, not aggressively, more like a machine making an automatic correction. The man in the charcoal suit raised one hand just slightly, and the other man stopped. Then he looked back at Ivy and said, in a voice that was very quiet and very even, "Don't." One word. The man who had moved went still. The entire cluster of dark coats went still. The woman at the concierge desk who had been reaching for the phone set it back down. Even the pianist in the lobby bar, who could not possibly have heard anything, seemed to pause for half a beat. Ivy stood in the middle of it with wet socks and a lopsided cello case and did not understand what had just happened. "Don't what?" she said, because she had grown up in Trois-Rivières and her mother had raised her not to be easily intimidated by men in expensive suits. Something moved in his expression. Not a smile exactly. A small controlled adjustment, the way a very precise instrument accounts for a variable it hadn't expected. "Don't apologize," he said. "You didn't do anything wrong." Then he walked past her, and the whole cluster of men moved with him, and the lobby exhaled, and Ivy stood there for another 4 seconds before someone tapped her elbow, and she turned to find Antoine, her violinist, looking at her with his eyebrows somewhere near his hairline. "Do you know who that was?" Antoine said. Ivy pulled her cello case upright. The wheel stuck again immediately. "No," she said. "I need to get tuned before 6. His name was Soren Vale. She learned this not from any deliberate research, but from overhearing the assistant manager speak it in a low, tight voice to the concierge while Ivy was setting up near the bar. Vale. Like a word from another language. The assistant manager said it the way people say names they are slightly afraid of, with a controlled neutrality that actually communicated everything. She learned the rest in pieces over the following days, the way information comes to a person who isn't trying to find it but is a nurse and therefore pays attention to things other people miss. Soren Vale was 41 years old. He had been photographed at 6 charity galas in the past 18 months, always at the edge of the frame, always in the same quality of a suit, never with the same woman twice. He was the managing director of Vale Capital Group, which was what you called the thing, when you needed it to have a name for business cards, but didn't especially want anyone examining it closely. He had grown up in Vancouver. His mother was Danish. He had one younger brother who worked for him, and one older associate who had died in what the business section had called a tragic accident 2 years ago in a port in Halifax. None of this would have mattered to Ivy, except that on the following Tuesday, she was on the cardiac unit at the Royal Vic when the elevator opened, and Soren Vale walked off it in the same charcoal suit, with 3 of his dark-coated men and a 4th man, younger, thinner, the same gunmetal quality around the eyes, who was being held upright between 2 of them. "We need a doctor," said one of the men. Ivy was already moving. "Bay 4, she said. "Put him down, gently. Please, I mean it. I can see you're not, but please be gentle. What happened? He fell," said the thin man himself, who was clearly not as badly off as he was being treated. He sounded irritated. "He was shot," said Soren Vale from directly behind her. The thin man gave him a look of profound betrayal. "In the arm," Soren said, without any particular inflection. "Grazed. He's being dramatic." "I'm bleeding through my 3rd shirt," the thin man said. "Bay 4, Ivy said again, and pulled the curtain aside and got to work. His name was Felix Vale. The younger brother, she realized, once she gotten a better look at him. Same jaw, same stillness, though Felix wore his with considerably less success. He was 26, and had been grazed by a bullet that had passed through a car window and caught the outer edge of his bicep, which was painful and bloody, and required proper cleaning, and 12 stitches, none of which were going to kill him. He talked the entire time she was stitching. "I tried to tell him not to go near the harbour," Felix said, gesturing at Soren with his uninjured arm, which Ivy had to redirect twice. "Didn't I say? I said the Desautels situation wasn't resolved. That's not me being difficult, that's just being correct." "It was resolved," Soren said, from the chair in the corner where he had sat down with the specific economy of a person who has decided not to take up any more space than is necessary. He was watching Ivy's hands. "It was resolved in the sense that we resolved our side of it," Felix said. "Their side was still pending. Hold still," Ivy said. Felix held still. "She's very good," he said to Soren. "Yes," Soren said. It was the same quality of attention as the lobby. Measured, like he was solving something. "You'll need to keep this dry for 48 hours, Ivy said, finishing the last stitch. "And actually dry. Not shower quickly dry. Change the dressing every morning. If it starts to look red around the edges or you develop a fever, you come back. Don't wait to see if it gets better on its own." "He won't listen to that," Soren said. "Then you make sure he does," Ivy said. Looking up, he met her eyes. The gunmetal quality up close was not cold, she realized. It was just very controlled, like a lake that was deep and had no visible current, but you understood that something was moving underneath it. "All right," he said in the same quiet voice he'd used in the lobby, as if it were perfectly natural for a woman in scrubs with a needle in her hand to give him instructions. She thought that would be the end of it. She was halfway through a double shift 2 weeks later when the charge nurse found her in the break room and told her she had a visitor. Ivy thought it was her roommate, Genevieve, who had a habit of bringing her Tim Hortons during long shifts in a way that was generous and also slightly made Ivy want to cry with gratitude. It was Soren Vale. He was standing in the hallway outside the break room, without his dark-coated men, which was disorienting. He was just a man in a very good suit standing in a hospital hallway, which should have made him seem more ordinary. It did not. "Felix developed a fever," he said, when she walked toward him. "I told him. He's fine. He went back. Different hospital." A pause. He listened about the dressing. Ivy crossed her arms. "Then why are you here?" He looked at her for a moment. In the lobby she'd had the impression of a man doing calculations. Now she had the impression of a man who had completed them and had arrived here as the result. "I wanted to thank you," he said. "You don't have to thank me. It's my job." "Not the stitches," he said. The other thing. She waited. In the lobby, he said. You looked at me the same way after you knew who I was as before. That is not. He paused. Not searching for the word, she thought, deciding whether to use it. That is not common. Ivy looked at him. The fluorescent light of the hospital hallway was not doing anyone any favors, and he looked exactly as controlled and contained in it as he had in the marbled warmth of the Harrington Grand. Some people belonged to their environment. Soren Vale belonged entirely to himself. I still don't really know who you are, she said. I know your name, and I know what people say you do, and I know your brother doesn't listen well. That's not very much. No, he said. It's not. I need to get back, she said. I know. He reached into his coat. The dark-coated men in the lobby had all moved when she'd bumped into him. She remembered and placed a card on the break room counter beside her. No name on it, just a number. If you ever need anything, he said. I won't, she said. Keep it anyway, he said, and left. She did keep it. She told herself it was because throwing it out would have been dramatic. She tucked it into the inside pocket of her nursing bag, where it sat alongside 2 pens that were running out of ink and a crumpled receipt from Jean Coutu and her mother's photo. 3 days later at 2 in the morning she used it. Not for herself. She wasn't the kind of person who called numbers at 2 in the morning for herself. She had learned that particular discipline early. Her mother's illness 4 years ago had taught her that falling apart was a luxury that didn't actually relieve anything, so she had stopped doing it. She used it because she had come home to find her apartment door open and her roommate Genevieve sitting on the kitchen floor with a split lip and 3 missed calls from a number that Ivy recognized from hospital intake forms as belonging to a man Genevieve had tried for 2 years to stop being afraid of. She got Genevieve taken care of first. That was the nursing instinct. Assess, stabilize, to address the immediate need. Then she sat in the kitchen, back against the cabinet, and looked at the card for a long time. She knew what calling that number meant. She had not spent the last 3 weeks thinking very carefully about exactly what Soren Vale's business involved without understanding what it would mean to hand that business a problem. She called. He answered on the second ring. Ivy, he said. Not a question. I need help, she said. Not the kind of help I can get from the police. She hated how that sounded. Hated what it meant about the situation that she was saying it. I have a friend who is being hurt by someone who has enough money that calling the police has already failed twice. I need it to stop. A pause. Not hesitation. Processing. Address, he said. She gave it. 40 minutes, he said. You don't have to, Ivy. The quiet voice. Not gentle, not harsh, even. 40 minutes. It was 37. She didn't ask what happened after. She understood that asking would be the wrong kind of curiosity. Not for moral reasons, not entirely, but because she had spent 4 years as a nurse learning that some things happened in the gap between what you could see and what was fixed. And the gap was not the point. The point was the outcome. The outcome was that the man who had hurt Genevieve did not appear again, did not call, did not send anyone to call on his behalf. Within 48 hours he had, as far as Ivy could determine, decided that Montreal was no longer somewhere he wanted to be. Genevieve asked her once, quietly, how she'd made that happen. I know someone, Ivy said. It was the least complete version of the truth she had ever told anyone, and she had told it entirely deliberately, and some part of her understood that this was itself significant, that she had moved into a category of careful speech she had never occupied before, and that she had done it not out of fear, but out of a specific new instinct she did not yet have a name for. Soren came back a week later. He called first, which surprised her. She'd had him as a man who simply arrived places. I thought you might want to know it's taken care of, he said. I gathered, she said. Thank you. A pause on his end. Outside her window the snow was still coming down. It had been a record year for snowfall, the radio kept saying, as if the snow didn't already know. She was sitting on her couch with her cello across her lap, not playing it, just resting her hand against the body of it the way she sometimes did when she was thinking. What are you doing? He said. Sitting, she said. Why? You sound like you're somewhere else. She looked at her hand on the cello. I was thinking about the first time I heard my mother play this, she said. She was a musician. This was hers. She hadn't meant to say that. She didn't generally say things like that to anyone, let alone to men she had known for 3 weeks under the particular circumstances she had known this one. "What did she play?" he said. "Bach," Ivy said. "Always Bach." She said he was the only composer who had figured out how to make mathematics sound like it was grieving. Silence on his end. Not the silence of someone not listening. The silence of someone sitting with it. "I'd like to hear you play," he said. "I play in a hotel lobby," she said, "as background music. You could come on a Thursday." "I'd rather not share it," he said, with such complete simplicity that she didn't know what to do with it for several seconds. She closed her eyes. Outside, the snow. The cello was warm under her hand. "You're a dangerous man," she said. "Not an accusation. Almost an observation." "Yes," he said. "I know. I don't know what to do with that." "I know," he said again. "Neither do I lately." She had known since the beginning that there was something wrong with how easy it was. Not easy in the sense of simple. Nothing about Soren Vale was simple, and nothing about the particular gravity of being in his orbit felt simple either. Easy in the sense that her instincts, which she had spent 10 years sharpening to clinical precision, had not told her to run. They told her to pay attention, which was a different instruction entirely. She paid attention. He had her cello wheel fixed. Had it done by someone, a man, who arrived at her door on a Saturday morning with a small toolkit and a manner so professionally neutral that she understood he had repaired many things for many people, and had never been asked to explain how he came to know about them. The wheel worked perfectly after that. She thought about calling Soren to say she hadn't needed that, and didn't call, because the honest answer was that she had needed it. And the cello had been a small daily inconvenience for 3 years, and something about having it solved felt like a door opening that she had not been aware was closed. She started to understand slowly what he was. Not the surface version, not Vale Capital Group and the photographs at the edges of gala frames. The real version, which was more complicated and less dramatic than the word people used for it, and which she categorized the way she categorized illness, based on observable pattern rather than the name someone else had assigned. He ran things. That was the most accurate version. He ran them with a precision that was almost medical, and he had people who depended on that precision. And he had enemies who were afraid of it. And he had a brother who loved him and drove him insane. And he had a life that he had built around the understanding that the cost of what he was required to be was a certain specific loneliness that he had accepted. So long ago, he had forgotten what the original negotiation felt like. She understood this not because he told her. He did not tell her. She understood it because she was a nurse, and she knew what compartmentalized pain looked like in the body. The slight deliberateness in the set of a jaw, the careful neutrality that people used when talking about things they had learned not to talk about. And because she had grown up watching her mother do the same thing, and had spent her childhood learning to read it, she brought it up once. They were in a restaurant on Laurier, his choice, a quiet Italian place, where the owner nodded to him with the specific reverence of someone who both liked and feared the same person, and she was watching him describe something to her, something about the deal he'd had in Vancouver that week, and she said, without planning to say it, "When did you decide you didn't get to want things for yourself?" He stopped. She hadn't said it to wound him. It wasn't that kind of question. She said it the way she asked patients questions that no one else on the care team had thought to ask, directly, and with genuine curiosity, and with the understanding that most people hadn't been asked and were quietly desperate to answer. He was quiet for a long time. "I was 23, he said. "My father died, and I inherited something I hadn't asked for, and I discovered that the people around me needed it to function, and I was very good at it." He turned his wineglass slowly. "That is not the same as deciding. It is more like discovering a room in a house you already live in and closing the door behind you. You can open doors," she said. "Not all doors," he said. "You opened this one." He looked at her. "Yes," he said, "I did. It came apart in February. She found out not from him but from the news. A business section item about an investigation into Vale Capital Group. Language so carefully lawyered it. Said everything and nothing at once. Then from Felix, who called her because Soren had told him not to call anyone, and Felix had decided, characteristically, that this instruction applied to everyone except Ivy. "He's handling it," Felix said, in the voice of someone who found the handling deeply upsetting. "What does handling it mean? It means he's been in meetings for 72 hours, and he's eaten approximately 1 sandwich, and he told me you didn't need to know about it." Ivy was in the hospital break room. She had 16 minutes left on her lunch break. Outside the window, the scent Lawrence was frozen in that particular mid-February grey that made Montreal look like the inside of a cloud. "Where is he?" she said. "His office on McGill College. Ivy, you don't have to." "What floor?" she said. She went in scrubs, because she didn't have time to go home, and she was not the kind of person who dressed for atmospheres. The receptionist on the 14th floor looked at her with an expression that could not decide whether to be confused or afraid, and she said Soren Vale's name, and the receptionist made a call. And 30 seconds later, one of the dark-coated men appeared, and looked at her for a moment, and then stepped aside. Soren was at his desk. He looked the same as always. Suit, stillness, the quality of containing something, except that his eyes when he looked up at her had the specific look of a person who had not slept in 2 days and had been very successfully pretending not to notice. "Felix called," he said. It was not a question. "Felix called," she said. "What's happening?" "A regulatory situation," he said. "It's being managed." "A regulatory situation," she repeated. "That required 72 hours of meetings and 1 sandwich." Something moved in his face. "You came here in scrubs," he said. "I had 16 minutes for lunch, and I decided to use them in a suboptimal way. Don't change the subject." "Don't," she said. "Don't manage me. I'm not one of your people. I'm not going to be frightened or impressed into backing off. Tell me what's actually happening." A long silence. He set down his pen. "There is a man named Hargreave," he said, "who has been building a case for 3 years. What happened in February with the port? Desautels. You heard Felix say that name. It was not an accident that it happened when it did. Hargreave arranged it. He wants me to respond in a way that gives him what he needs." He looked at her steadily. "So I'm not going to respond that way. What way are you going to respond?" "Carefully," he said. "Legally, in fact, which will surprise him." She looked at him for a moment. "Because you can." "Because I have been managing my affairs with considerable precision for 17 years, he said. "And I am not actually as exposed as he believes I am, because I had the particular foresight to keep a man named Gerald Thibault as my legal counsel. And Gerald Thibault is, in my opinion, the finest mind in Montreal and possibly the country. And you didn't tell me," she said, "because you were protecting me." A pause. "Yes," he said. "Soren." She put her hands on his desk and leaned forward. "I walked into you in a hotel lobby in November. I stitched your brother's arm. I called you at 2 in the morning from my kitchen floor because I needed help, and I didn't know who else to trust. I am not a person you protect from information. I am a person you tell things to." He looked at her for a long time, then very quietly. "I know," he said. "I'm learning that." She straightened up. "Eat something," she said. "I'm serious. You look like a man who is running on willpower and stubbornness, and that combination has a worse outcome than people think." The corner of his mouth moved. "That sounds like a clinical opinion." "It is," she said. "I have 10 years of data." He stood up from his desk. He was very tall, she thought, for approximately the 100th time, and she had stopped noticing it as a fact separate from everything else, and started noticing it only as part of him. The way you stopped noticing specific features of a face and started noticing the face. "There's a place on St. Catherine that does the best poutine in Montreal," he said. "I realize that is not a sentence I have ever said to anyone in this office." "Good," she said. "Sentences like that shouldn't stay in offices." Hargreave's case collapsed in March. Not dramatically. Gerald Thibault, whose existence Ivy had now verified and whose reputation proved to be, if anything, undersold, had been working a particular angle on the evidentiary chain for 8 months. The angle held. The case did not. The business section item that followed was more careful than the first one, and said rather less. Soren told her about it on the phone. She was on the highway between Montreal and Trois-Rivières. She drove up to see her aunt twice a year, and February had gotten away from her, and she pulled into a rest stop east of Drummondville and sat in her car with the engine running because it was -18. "It's done," he said. "I know," she said. "I saw." There will be other things, he said. There always are. I want you to understand that. This particular situation is resolved, but the shape of my life, Soren, she said. I am a nurse. I work 12-hour shifts in a hospital. I deal with things that don't resolve cleanly and situations that circle back and complications that arrive when you think you've handled them. I am not under any impression that anything in your life is going to be tidy. A pause. Outside the rest stop, an 18-wheeler went past and the car shuddered slightly from the wake. You're remarkable, he said in the same quiet, even voice he used for everything, and she understood that for a man who said very little that wasn't calculated, this was not small. I'm practical, she said. It looks the same from the outside. Not from where I'm standing, he said. She looked at the highway. The snow was thin today, the kind that blew sideways rather than falling, and the sky was the pale white of early March that meant spring was somewhere on the other side of it, not visible yet, but real. I'm going to be in Trois-Rivières until Sunday, she said. You could come up. Silence on his end. Longer than usual. I have, he stopped. I have never been to Trois-Rivières. I know, she said. You've also apparently never had poutine in an informal setting until February, so clearly there are gaps. She could hear him breathing. She had not told him about her mother yet. Not all of it. The illness, yes. The cello, the Bach, the mathematics of grief, but not the full weight of what it had cost, and what it had taught her, and why she understood. In a way she had not been able to explain to anyone who had not lived a version of it. The specific discipline of caring for something that might not survive. She would tell him in Trois-Rivières. She had decided that on the highway, between the second and third exits, while the snow moved sideways outside the window, and the road ahead was clear and very long. Sunday, he said. I'll be there Saturday. She smiled, which she hadn't been planning to do, which was probably the point. Bring Felix, she said. He's been texting me updates about his arm for 6 weeks. I think he needs closure. A sound from his end that she had learned, over 4 months, to recognize as the closest Soren Vale came to laughing. No, he said. Absolutely not. She was still smiling when she pulled back onto the highway, heading east, toward the house where she'd grown up, where her mother's cello had first made her understand that some things only sound simple, and where, she thought, she might finally be ready to play Bach for someone who would know exactly what he was hearing.